Stream should be transitioning over. If there's anyone that is watching this stream, let me know that you can hear us. Cool. So there's the agenda. Generally similar structure. No surprises here. That month. I know after talking with a couple client teams, there was some confusion here. I alluded to a little bit in some of these calls, but I'll be very clear right now. So it is time, and Afri kept suggesting it is time that our versions are a little bit more meaningful. So anything under v0.11, except for that v0.11.0, which had a bug and we fixed very quickly, will be backwards compatible. We have a v0.11.2 under final review right now to be released probably today. This is not gossip conditions to be on a per epoch basis instead of a per slot basis. If two clients were on kind of these disparate degenerate cases, those are still interoperable. So check it out. It's PR under review. That will be released today. If anything else, any minor things come through that are backwards compatible, they can continue to be released under v0.11. v0.12 is coming. v0.12 is slated for our oh fun. There's someone joining with the name Wendy's too. The v0.12 is slated for the IETF BLS standard being updated to the next draft. There's a draft 7 of the hash-to-curve that is supposedly imminent. Along with that, there is a couple of type fixes, which I think would ultimately be non-substantive to you and are just fix things in our linter. And it looks like there is a additional validation condition being added to the fork choice. Thank you, Aditya, based on some of the old conversations and issues that were picked up and is a fix. So v0.12 is coming. v0.12 is primarily a swap of an underlying library. v0.11 testnets and v0.12 testnets will not be interoperable. v0.11 testnets are still very important today for doing all of our interop testing, for potentially getting some users on them, like the Topaz. But ultimately, whatever ends up being a long-term persisted multi-client testnet, not some of the testnets that we're spinning up today, will have to target this new IETF standard.
Will
Cool.
0.12 come with fork choice tests?
Great question. I think Aditya is looking into that a little bit, and Alex is looking into that as well, but default is maybe. Obviously an incredibly difficult time prioritizing this, but it's something we've opened up again in the past couple of days. It might come with, and this is the next point, some modified rewards and penalties tests. So debugging Lighthouse and Prism, well, the wee hours of the morning for me, I wasn't up, but normal hours for Australia. There was another rewards penalties bug found. It's currently on the Topaz testnet. And if you were part of Interop in Canada, this is not a surprise. It's where like 90% of our bugs lied when we tried to get clients to pair. So in light of that, that's something we've talked about a little bit internally, but it's a super clear signal that this thing is, that massive function is error prone and is probably going to be a source of consensus bugs if we see any on mainnet. So in light of that, Proto and I are working on a proposal to reformat that function into different subfunctions to be able to test things a lot more granularly. Right now, it's difficult for us to write tests because there's a lot of moving parts within that single function, and so it's difficult to even make sure that you're testing and triggering the right things. Honestly, the bug that we saw, I was a little bit surprised because I thought that we had it tested. So that is something probably in the next 24 hours, we're going to have a proposal up for a new way to format that function, a new format for tests for that function. Those are coming. As for the Topaz net, there's a bug deployed, so we're also, Prism team's going to have to figure out how to restart, fork, or whatever with that testnet, but that's a separate conversation. Cool.
Hey Danny, sorry, this is Preston. I just joined. I can talk about we kind of just decided a plan for
cool.
Topaz.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So we think we're going to run Topaz at least for now, to kind of suss out some of these issues we have, like with memory usage and kind of profiling, with a lot of activity on 0.11. And we know already that we have to restart for 0.12, right? Because there's like a BLS change.
Yep.
So that will be our planned restart for Topaz with this bug fix. And in terms of interop, we can do some like smaller local test nets, or little coordinated test nets with other clients, and then we can maintain a brand
coming change. And you're right, it is useful to have a bunch of people on there for your memory issues. Cool. Okay.
Danny, I missed when you're targeting this change for. This is for 0.12, the modified functions and refactoring.
So it would be a non-substantive change and would totally be backwards compatible, and you actually wouldn't have to necessarily change anything in your client other than the testing harness. So it might, I mentioned that it would certainly be out by v0.12, but this might be something that we might have a testing update come actually just next week on the v0.11 to update that testing harness.
Cool, thanks.
Cool. So that's the general, very long-winded update on releases and testing. Proto, anything else on your end?
Yeah, I just wanted to note that although it's a critical bug, it doesn't really affect users directly, luckily. So what's happening here is that within the attestation delta, you can get slightly different rewards. Right now, there's this mistake where one type of vote gets the context of another type of vote. And so unless you start to look really deep into the function, you won't really notice as a user. And right now, it effectively means that the rewards are just slightly higher than they should be. Yes, we should fix this, and it's better to have this fixed and run on the DevNet, work towards some healthy mainnet, but the Topaz testnet right now can just move on.
Yeah, and so it's not critical in the context of a single client. It's critical if there are multiple clients. Yeah, cool. Okay, but again, given all of the bugs that we debugged in Canada last year, not terribly surprising. And this is something that I think we really need to harden against. There's a lot of moving parts in there, and getting these balances, getting any balance wrong is going to cause forking on mainnet.
Just to know, the PySpec is correct, or is it buggy as well?
I think Serenity, PySpec, Lighthouse, and did you all test against Nimbus? All of those are the same, and we
used NCLI and it was the same.
Yeah, and it's already, there's a PR, or there's a note in I think an old PR on the actual lines that were found in Prism. So cool. Is Lakshman here? No. Proto, do we have anything on the network testing?
I can give a short update. So along with the spec changes, sorry for background noise. Along with the spec changes, I updated Rumor to include these new functionalities. as the new RPC types and whatnot. So clients can start testing using that functionality right now. But then for network tests, as like test vectors, we changed the direction there a little bit. As in actively instrumenting, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 different clients is not going to work short term. We definitely try and like look at clients and maybe instrument one client. But to enable network tests for each of the clients, we decided on an approach closer to the current spec test, where we have these configuration files or these YML files, define the test, and have a client start at the client, instrument their client with the right private key for their network identity, the right feature set and whatnot, and then run the network test script to run the actual test. So we'll still be defining the tests and looking at all this different network behavior, but we try and manage these responsibilities between client and testing infrastructure better.
Okay. Other testing and release updates or comments or questions?
Hey, Danny, just a quick one on Fuzz.
Excellent.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Hey everyone, Mehdi here. So the latest fuzzing efforts were pretty prolific. We found about 5 bugs on Nimbus, including a pretty cool Stack Overflow. We also found 2 minor bugs on ZRNT, which I think Proto has already fixed. Not sure this was mentioned last time, but we also found a very interesting and critical bug in our SSZ deserialization on Lighthouse. By the way, we published a blog post, so if you go to blog.cpp.io, the top post, it's got a lot of details around that bug. We've been using HonkFuzz, which is a pretty cool Google fuzzing engine that allows us to generate interesting samples. So basically, we're keeping the ones that triggering more code paths on Lighthouse, and we're feeding them to all the other implementations. I just want to talk about the fact that a lot of implementations out there are treating beacon states as trusted structures. This is quite risky if we're potentially moving to a version of a warp sync for Eth2, so syncing by beacon states and not just block batches. So yeah, there's a lot of, so we've had a conversation around overflows and underflows. So the spec has been clarified, which is good. Now state transition is supporting multiple fuzzing engines, including HonkFuzz. We'll be leveraging our structural fuzzing effort. We currently have a PR in the works to do this on Lighthouse, and we'll be using the generated samples in the differential fuzzer or differential processor. So we're going to document all this in a nice design doc that will be shared with everyone, hopefully sometime next week. And we're looking forward to community feedback. And that's it.
Great, thanks, Mehdi. Any questions for Mehdi? Great, appreciate it. Glad to see we're finding some bugs.
Sure.
Okay, other testing updates, I think that's probably it. Great, moving on to the clients. Let's start with Lodestar.
Hey, so past few weeks we've been mainly working on getting to spec compliance. So we're mostly up to date with 0.11. We're passing 0.11 spec tests. The 2 notable gaps are snappy compression on request responses and a few ENR things. I don't think we have the ETH2 ENR flag yet. So we're working through that. And we're also going to be fixing up our CLI to make it a little easier to run Lodestar. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Cameron. And did I see that y'all had the state transition merged in for the V011?
Yeah, our current master is on v0.11.
Cool, cool. So that means it's at least some of the core components are useful to developers and things that might want to use it.
Yeah, for sure.
Great. Thanks, Gaiman. Prism.
Hey guys, Terrence from Prismatic Labs. So we launched our Topaz testnet. It currently has 21,000 validators with 3,000 pending. And right now we're about 40,000 slots since Genesis, which was last Friday. We hasn't skipped one finality yet, except for one incident, and the root cause has been identified and fixed. And like what was announced earlier, we were able to sync with Lighthouse until the first epoch. We found a consensus bug on our implementation due to a number overflow. So today we'll fix the bug and then likely restart a new dev test net for working with Lighthouse. So far, just been lots of great feedback on Topaz. So we did a lot of process improvement, micro optimizations, and making our UX better. And that's about it.
Great. Thanks, Terrence. Teku.
Okay, that's me. So our JVM lib P2P noise implementation is now interoperable with Lighthouse. From what I understand, the Go implementation needs some upstream fixes, but then we should be able to fully interoperate with Prism after that using noise. We've implemented some optimizations. So one is batch verification of signatures within blocks. This gives a modest but worthwhile speed up. The proto-array fork choice algorithm is implemented and has been tested using Alex Vlasov's fork choice tests. We've also reworked our hot state management in order to keep all of the hot state completely in memory. So on restarts, we regenerate it by replaying blocks onto the last finalized state. This has improved our sync speed by a factor of 3 or so. And our current focus in the current sprint is finishing up all the network changes for v0.11. The state transition is up to date. That's all from Teku.
Great. That all sounds great. And congrats on getting the noise interoperable. I guess an aside, do we have an update on the GoLib P2P noise bug? Anyone from Prism, are y'all monitoring that one?
Hey guys, so not yet. It still requires some fixing on the lib P2P side. The problem has to do with simultaneous handshakes. And basically, lib P2P doesn't really handle who should be the initiator of the handshake. So that's still pending resolution. We're still just supporting SecIO. Ideally, once it's fixed, we would just update to noise and allow the fallback to happen correctly.
Cool. Thanks, Rob. Trinity.
Everyone, steady progress on a v0.11 testnet. There's a lot of lateral change going on with the client right now as we switch over to a different concurrency framework in Python, but still some progress towards testnets, internal changes to the fork choice, some ops work we've been doing on our team for running Trinity testnets, and we also got an updated BLS binding over Milagro thanks to Chang.
Nice. Bring some speed to that BLS. Thanks, Alex. Nimbus.
Hi. So on the core part, we switched our testnet 1 to use the mainnet configuration. So now we have testnet 0 using minimal and testnet 1 that uses mainnet. We have some performance improvements to do. In particular, our processing is dominated by hash tree root. And we know that we have a lot of repeated hash tree root that we can skip. So some focus is on that. And we also have stack overflows, probably one that was detected by Beacon Fuzz. Another thing on that is that Currently, we use this update and rewind states to apply to new blocks to those. I think Lighthouse used that at least 3 months ago as well. But we are concerned now about it being a potential DOS vector if some blocks or attestation are crafted to make us spend lots of time processing those. On the networking side, we have improved our syncing algorithm. Now we have more reliable syncing, and we spent the past weeks also debugging discovery and lib P2P. In particular, we had memory leaks, some solved, and we have at least another one to track down. To prepare for auditing, we are removing stale code, and we are improving the handling of errors in all of our libraries, lib2p, cryptography, and the NIM beacon chain as well. And on the interrupt side, we fixed the bug that led to different genesis between Nimbus and Lighthouse, something that we talked about 2 weeks ago. We have discovery between Lighthouse and Nimbus working, but we cannot talk yet. And we also try to run Prism locally, and this part is still work in progress.
Great. Thank you, Mami. And Lighthouse.
Hello, Paul here. Just regarding Manny talking about the database thing, we do that. We call it sparse storage. So you store, it's kind of configurable, but you store a full state on, say, every epoch boundary, and then you replay epochs to get the ones in the middle. Something we've done is that we make the assumption that any block in our database has signatures verified. So when we're replaying blocks, we don't need to verify signatures. So that saves a little bit of time, a lot of time really. But we've flattened out the state roots. So there's another point is we only do it in the cold section. So we only do it in the finalized area, and in the hot section, we keep all of the states there. But in the finalized section, because it's finalized, we flatten out all the state roots into their own kind of key. So when we're replaying blocks onto there, we're not actually doing state roots. We already know what the state roots are too. That might be useful, not sure. Getting into our update. We've launched 2 testnets in the last week, a 4,000 validated testnet and a 16,000 validated testnet. They're not 100% to V11 spec yet. We're still kind of stress testing and testing out our deployment infrastructure and getting some bugs. We're hoping that we can launch a long-lasting 16K testnet next week, but we don't want to do that prematurely. We've merged in this long-running V0.2.0 branch that we had that people were getting frustrated with, ourselves and other people. So that's now in master. So master is now version 11.1 state transition. We're getting pretty close to full compat for version 0.11.1. We've raised several PRs on the networking spec over the last couple of weeks to kind of address things in caches and stuff like this. I spent a fair bit of time learning and using Ansible to automate our testnets. It's pretty cool. So I think it's like just SSH automation. So there's no, like software to install for it, just SSH boxes, and you define what you want to do in YAML. So we can go, 3 commands go from nothing to deploy AWS infra with deposit contract, and then, like boot nodes distributed and Eth distributed, validated, deposited, and then the testnet started. So we've been enjoying that, and we're hoping that we can use that. It works quite well for managing multiple disparate testnets. So we're looking forward to starting some testnets with short slot times and other challenging kind of things. So that thing is all fully open source, except for hopefully our authentication secrets at sigp/lighthouse-ansible, if you want to look at it. Adrian started to sync with Prism, managed to get the RPC working and block started downloading. Then we hit the state root thing. We've already spoken about that. We made some progress on switching to Rust's latest async programming feature called Stable Futures, which gives us an updated async executor so we can avoid some locks we've been having. We went and implemented safe arithmetic through the state transition logic so we can fuzz with arbitrary states So our goal is to assert that our implementation is panic-free across any arbitrary state. I think we're getting close with fuzzing it, but hopefully we'll get there soon. Haven't found anything yet since that. And to do that, Michael wrote a Rust linter that goes and finds unchecked arithmetic. We ran that across the code base and already found some interesting mod by zeros and stuff like this. We're doing some research on server-side events to see if it's feasible with our HTTP library. It's looking good so far. We're looking forward to jumping on that standard HTTP API when it's defined. And finally, Michael's revisiting our slashing protection database. And we're doing some thinking about exporting out to like JSON or some format so that we can transfer validators between Lighthouse instances and hopefully between other clients. So we'll present that when we come up with something interesting for that. And that's it from me.
Cool. Thank you. And I think Proto is managing another set of Ansible scripts to generically deploy across different clients, but maybe you can share about some of that in a couple weeks. Great. I think that is everyone that's here, right? Okay. Great. Generally, I think people gave their individual testnet updates. There's a public testnet out in Prism. Lighthouse is working on some testnet stuff. Nimbus has their regular weekly restart testnets, and some base interoperability stuff going on. Afri, do you have anything else to update us on?
Yeah, I have some comments, sure. So 2 weeks ago, I dropped the .10 testnet spec in favor of .11 because most of the clients are working towards .11. I started backwards this time, tried to bootstrap a network based on Teku. My main goal was trying to find out what can be done with Teku yet. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to get this testnet bootstrapped. I later added a Lighthouse node to validate that the configuration is valid and that worked, but eventually I bricked it. And then I didn't have the time to investigate and was a little bit distracted by the Topaz launch, and also curious about adding a Lighthouse node to Topaz, but I think most of the things have been covered in this call already. Experience is bumpy, networking, yeah, there was this one consensus bug. In general, I would like to emphasize that we will probably have these single client testnets for a while because they serve a good purpose for the according client teams. For interoperability, I would encourage that we have more short-lived testnets so we can faster evaluate any issues that occur, let it be networking, synchronization, consensus, or whatever comes up. Yeah, so if possible, if we could start setting up fail-fast devnets in the future, that would be nice. But I believe from the conversations on Discord, that's where everyone is going to. That's my update.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you. Okay, any other comments on testnets, devnets, interoperability, things like that? Okay.
I think one thing might be the Eth2 testnets repo is using a config.yaml file that describes the testnet. It was modeled off the configs directory in the spec, but that's now kind of full of phase 1 stuff that's not really particularly interesting to phase 0 clients. So I think we're probably going to see clients like we're missing a few things from there because it's not obvious anymore what is and isn't in it. So there's kind of like no longer a firm reference for what that config.yaml should be.
Right, I see.
So I guess an action for that might be that defining that structure would be useful. So I don't know whether you want to split it into 2 parts in the spec repo, or we just define another structure for it? Because we've had a bit of trouble. Like when we're trying to.
I think it's going to be sane to keep them separate or to keep them as subcomponents of one or the other. Yeah, because it's a mess right now. Okay, we'll take a look at that.
Yeah, something Prism might want to consider too is publishing one of those, because we're having a bit of trouble figuring out exactly what constants they are. We know they're mainnet, but just we're kind of doubting ourselves when we had the state issue.
Yeah, that sounds true to us. We will do that.
Cool. Great, we're going to move on to research updates. I'm going to find a new location to be because people are hammering outside my window. Okay, research updates. Who wants to get us started?
We'll go. TXRX is ready.
Great.
So we had our steering panel, which is just kind of like getting researchers to help us understand what we're working on and help us kind of like focus better. And with that, Mikhail is working on an Eth2.0 merger doc that I think the publishing of that doc is imminent. Cross-shard transactions, we're still working on the throughput analysis. We have some interesting results when we're sweeping the probability of a cross-shard transaction, and that should be released soon. Johnny Ray is working on a network monitoring tool called Perkle. I'm sorry for anybody that's Finnish. I guess that's a curse word in Finnish. So he's connected to the Topaz testnet, and he's able to monitor peers and walk the DHT of the Topaz network. Alex is continuing on these clock sync. He's working on some things around verifiable precompiles for to overcome the JIT problems or the JIT bomb problems with the EEs, and as well as his PySpec, or he's working on fork choice rule for or fork choice tests for based on PySpec. So he's wanting to make essentially a transpiler that will take the PySpec and compile it into the languages, test into the languages of the clients rather than having to manually modify them. And Dimitri is continuing on with disk v5 simulation, and that's making some progress. He's got it so you can compare about 14 different metrics. Yeah, that's us.
Cool. Thanks, Joe. Other research updates?
I can talk about my PR.
Great.
All right, so Paul opened an issue about the FFG and LND vote in attestations not being consistent. And so I won't describe what the issue is, but the fix to it is that when you receive attestations outside of blocks, you should check that the beacon block root and the target for that attestation is in the same chain. So this introduces like some new stuff in the fork choice spec, no removals. So it's still not backwards compatible, but yeah, it should be hopefully a minor change to the clients. And I put the pull request in the chat if anyone wants to check out what it looks like.
Yeah, cool. I think the plan is to get some testing in there and to get it staged for the V012.
Right, and the fork choice stuff. So fork choice testing, try to get on it as soon as possible. It should be in the next major update to the spec. Fuzzy testing seems fine for now, but somewhere down the line, we also want to test for orchestrated attacks. So let's see if we can get it in the next major update.
Yeah, cool. And there's some ongoing work with Alex from TXRX, so we'll make sure to follow up with him too to make sure we're coalescing on one thing. Okay, other research items. Vitalik, do you have anything for us? That's either a no or you're muted. Okay, moving on. Will, anything on your end?
Nothing new from the last announcement. We are continuing to work towards account abstraction in the Eth2.0 endeavor, and also thinking about Eth2.0 64, and have been working on just generally getting data so we can start evaluating how we might partition properly current ETH1 transactions if we were to expand it across multiple shards.
Got it. Axip, you just joined us. Perfect timing. Do you have any update from y'all's work that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I would like to share the Eth1X write-up, but we haven't shared it yet. I think we did share a version with you, Danny, just for review.
Yep.
But we plan to really get it out this week. Apart from that, there was just a small post regarding the block hash on ETH Research, which was triggered by the Eth1X 64 work, and could have some implications regarding stateless Ethereum. But I think it may have more implications regarding the ETH1, ETH2 merge. I think these are the only visible updates from our side.
Yeah, cool. And I reviewed that. It's a great post. Excited to see it published. Thank you. Okay, anything else? Any other research updates, questions, comments before we move on?
I can talk about the phase 1 recent work.
Yep.
So I'm working on to recap our outdated phase 1 shard chain issues and try to make the current spec to be updated. And I think we have organized some to-do list, and we will try to finish them in the next couple weeks. And maybe we had a kind of the phase 1 freezing date last year, and now I think it's a good time to make the phase 1 spec to be stable as possible.
Yeah, agreed. I think especially probably, I know some of you have begun to look at that spec we're working on, Choe is working on, kind of refining some of the state transition, cleaning things up, testing. We're adding the validator guide, adding network spec, and so certainly at the beginning of May, if you haven't taken a look at it and you want to start digesting it, it'll be a good time. Okay, other research updates. Great. We did have an API call, didn't mention that. On Monday, there were some decisions made. There was some discussion of kind of this like straw man proposal that Proto put together for a Beacon API, and the formation of a small working group to refine that, make it as restful as possible, and get an updated proposal out. There's been some work done there. I'm not sure if there's an update. Marin, do you have anything for us, or are we going to wait more till next week for an update?
I've started some small changes. I don't know if people can see the other tab on the little sheet.
Yeah, it's there.
Yes, there are small changes. Like we
combined a lot of APIs into single ones because there's a lot of naming and other stuff. It was different. Hopefully, Mikhail will take a look soon and probably pitch in some more endpoints.
Yeah, cool. Goal is to have, as we have components of the Beacon Node API, to push them out more for public review iteratively. So definitely get some stuff out to y'all by next week. Thanks, Brian. Okay, we haven't had a networking call in a bit. We had that API call this week instead. Are there any? I know Lighthouse has brought a number of small networking changes, primarily around these gossip validation conditions, trying to reduce the overhead of some of the caches and stuff. Is there anything else that's come up that y'all want to discuss? Any glaring issues, any problems you found on testnets with respect to networking?
One thing I've noticed that might just be worth mentioning, there's some issues for this, but the blocks that you could propagate on the net, there's like really lots of different verification conditions for attestations now. Like the blocks that you can publish on the network are like not necessarily able to be like included for aggregation, or they can be included for aggregation, but they can't necessarily be put into fork choice. So yeah, I just wanted to point out there's lots of different things, and we've had to really pay attention to, like before we were returning an error on the attestation. If someone sent us an attestation and we got an error adding it to fork choice, we would declaring that to be invalid, but it is actually valid for an attestation you get on that you've gossiped to not actually get added to your fork choice. So it's something for clients to keep in mind.
Right. Yeah, the conditions are first and foremost DOS resistant conditions in the gossip. And then, like, for example, the block one's very obvious. Like, we don't actually run the state transition. You know, we see if the signature checks, because that's a signal, a pretty strong signal that a proposer wouldn't have wasted their proposal, kind of like someone doing the proof of work. And so there is certainly a difference between fully verifying these messages and just verifying the DOS resistant stuff. So yes, there are some disparities there. Cool. Other networking things? Great. Spec items. Obviously, we talked about at the beginning of this. Proto and I are working on a modified proposal to break up the mega rewards function into better testable components, so that we can try to nip some of these rewards problems in the bud. But we'll have an update on that soon. Any other spec things? Great. Open discussion. Anything anyone wants to talk about upcoming?
Speaking of spec stuff, actually, we want to talk about, there's this kind of brief, a couple of changes that I think either one of them I mentioned, the other Justin mentioned recently, and they seem like, even if we think it's too late to do it, to add them into phase 0, they seem like potentially good ideas for phase 1. So one of those was Justin's proposal to unify uniqueness slashing for beacon blocks and shard blocks, and potentially anything else that has uniqueness. And the other one was the proposal that I had suggested, that basically we try to maintain an invariant that the maximum possible amount of money or amount of rewards everyone gets actually is based on like the base reward divided by the square root of the balance. So there's a nice and simple formula straight from the protocol for calculating what the maximum rewards are.
So on yours, that is true, other than, I guess, slashings in phase 0?
In phase 0, it's slightly untrue. The reason is proposer rewards, right? So right now, I think each of the rewards is divided by, it was at 5, either 4, and there actually are like 5 sections of rewards that all add up to base reward divided by the square root of the balance. But then there's also the total rewards that are like the other rewards divided by 8.
So the proposer reward is actually a portion of a base reward.
Ah, okay.
So I think that is true right now, other than the slashing
okay,
finder's fee.
Then that got changed since the last time I looked, but let me check quickly right now.
Yeah, so inclusion delay, you take that base reward, you give a portion to the proposer, and then you give the rest of it to the
base rewards per epoch is 4.
Yeah.
Oh, right. The proposer reward is right. Okay, so base rewards per epoch is 4, and then get base reward is divided by 4, and then the get base reward is added for once for matching source, once for matching target, once for matching head, and then there's the inclusion delay reward, and then let's see, where does it
So in the inclusion delay reward, it first gives something to the proposer.
Okay, so it gets,
and then the remainder the remainder can be given, but then is scaled for the tester.
Right, okay, and then there aren't any fancy objects in phase 0 except for slashings, but in slashings, like more ETH gets destroyed anyway, so we don't care.
Right.
Right, okay, so
I think maintaining the invariant, I think, would be valuable for reasoning in phase 1.
Yeah, okay, so that's good to have in phase 1 then.
As for the equivocations, I think there's a little bit of a mixed response. My inclination would be, if we want it, to deprecate proposer slashings in phase 1 and replace it with that message.
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
And I think Justin was under the impression that there were 3. There'd be 3 uniquenesses coming in phase 1, or add 1 plus 2. But there is no shard attestations. So there's only 2 known objects right now.
Right, the beacon block
and
proposals
the
and
close.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Okay. Any other spec things? Oh, sorry, we're not on spec. We're on it's kind of spec. Open discussion. Anything else? Anything else anybody has?
Hey, Danny. I'm just wondering if you could give us any timelines on the next upcoming releases for the spec changes.
Yeah, so we have V0 11.2 that is in the queue right now. That is backwards compatible with V0 11.1. We have the V0 12, which is dependent upon the release of the next draft of the IETF standard. We are in communication with the spec maintainers, and they say it's imminent, but they said that a week ago. So we're going to continue to knock on their door. That would, ideally, first week of May we can cut this release, but there's a little bit of this variable that's out of our control. As for the modified testing of the deposit, of the rewards function, that is something that we'll probably release to V011, which would be totally non-substantive, but would change some of the test harnesses as soon as possible. So potentially next week.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks.
Yeah,
and for 0.12, we think that's the version we want to carry to mainnet, or do we expect any other changes?
Following that, the only breaking changes we would integrate would be critical security fixes. I'm not confident to say that we wouldn't necessarily find any of those. There are ongoing audits of clients which might uncover things, and there's the potential that we run into some bugs on these testnets and interoperability testing. But barring critical bug fixes, the plan is to bring that v0.12 to mainnet.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And as for we're going to be able to release that IETF, the v0.12, as soon as they release that, but there's also going to be some lag time on getting these libraries updated. So we'll signal to all the library maintainers once that's out, so we can try to get that as soon as possible. Cool. Anything else? Great. Thank you. Keep up the good work. Really excited to see all these test nets, and let's not be too surprised when we find more bugs. All right. Thank you, everyone. I'll talk to you all very soon.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks, everyone.